Good evening. It's great to be back for the final session of the day, talking about one of my favourite topics, kingdom business. I would probably describe myself as a somewhat hyperactive entrepreneur. In fact, my grandmother said to my father when I was little, "There's something wrong with this kid, he's too active." And I've carried that all the way through into my adult life. I've loved business and I loved being self-employed. So I'm 43 and I've been self-employed since the age of 29. So I'll be sharing particularly from that kind of perspective. I appreciate not all of you are yet in your own business, but maybe thinking about it. But it's something that I think is particularly exciting. I want to give you a bit of my story though. So I became a Christian when I was 17. I went to an all-boys school, which is kind of problematic because there's no girls. And so what do? You go to church. That's where you meet girls, right? And so I joined a local Anglican church just up the road from where I lived, hopeless with the girls, but found God instead and became a Christian around that sort of 17 years of age. And it's been an amazing journey ever since. But I would sort of in my early Christian life, I started to get what I would call the ministry itch. That is, I just kind of always felt that I should be doing more for God, that I wanted to be doing something that would have an impact. So for many years, I contemplated, do I become a pastor? Do I go to Bible college and all these sort of things? In hindsight, I'm glad I didn't end up going down that path because I think I've found my calling, so to speak. But I just had this sense that I wanted to be doing more. And that's how many, I think, business people feel. Because they've bought the lie that being in business is somehow a secular activity, okay? Rather than being a kingdom business activity, something where you are an ambassador for Christ in the marketplace. And that's something that many of us suffer from because we think that the solution is to become a pastor. Now, we need great pastors, don't get me wrong, but many of you are in fact called to business. And that's where you're meant to be. So, as I say, my background is I've loved all things entrepreneurial. I actually set up my first business when I was in first year uni with a couple of mates in the street. And we actually set up in my parents' garden shed. And what we were going to do is teach people how to study. So we had created this business called Study Well, and we had little business cards. And my best source of leads was my mother, who went around and told everyone that Alex can help your kids learn how to, study for the HSC and things like that. So that was my first sort of taste. That business didn't last all that long, but it was good fun. It gave me sort of a bit of flavour. Then what I found is I went into corporate life. My actual first job, because my degree was in marketing, so I did a commerce degree in marketing. So my very first job was actually kind of the dream marketing job. I got a job working for Coca-Cola. So I worked on their graduate program for a year. And then at the end of the year, with another guy as well, I got made redundant. And I'd always had this interest in the finance industry. So I literally wrote letters to every stockbroking firm in Sydney. And I ended up joining a small broking firm called Joseph Palmer & Sons, which a firm most of you probably never heard of, but it's been around for about 140 years. It's probably one of the oldest broking firms in the country. And I did that for a while and really loved the finance industry. And so went on this path. I ended up leaving stockbroking, did that for a few years, and then went into financial planning. And I just found working for other people, this is just my personal experience, not necessarily you, I found working for other people difficult in the sense that I was not a political person. I don't like playing the politics game that many of you might experience if you worked in the corporate world for any period of time. And the other thing is being both a Christian, but also even though I come from a non-Christian household, my parents, my father particularly, was a very staunchly ethical person in business. So he did very well in business despite being extremely ethical, which is a strong message, I think, for Christians. We need to be ethical in business. So working for other people I found very frustrating because I had people surrounded me in the finance industry doing all sorts of crooked things. Things like you've seen in movies, like insider trading. I could tell you tons of stories about all the criminality that I've witnessed in my finance career. And so it came to the point where I was so frustrated that I had to sort of step out of the boat and start my own business. So at 29, I left what was an accounting firm at the time. I worked in their financial planning division and started my own business called Arcadian Private Wealth. And by God's grace, that business grew over an 8-year period and I was able to then sell it and for a reasonable sum of money that meant I could then start this ministry. Because during that sort of time, in fact, when I reflect on that business, I think of it as my training ground. God showing me things about how the business world works, learning all these different skills. And anyone who's in their own business knows you end up becoming a kind of jack of all trades. You've got to be a bookkeeper, a marketer, a bush lawyer. You've got to know all these things when you're running your own business. And so that was a really great experience. But about 8 years in, I made the call to sell that business and start this ministry, Wealth with Purpose, which is all about teaching Christians what the Bible says about money and, of course, about business. So that's kind of my background, the journey I've been on. And now what I'm doing, of course, is I'm sort of running two businesses. One is the ministry, the Wealth with Purpose, where we help churches, we coach and consult churches, and I also have a financial planning business, which I restarted in March last year. So that's sort of a bit of my background. But what I want to talk about now is what it means to be a kingdom business person. What does it actually look like? Okay, what are the issues and challenges that we face? And so the question I want to begin with, and you've heard me sort of mention this before, is are you called to business? Okay, many of us, we think, I certainly believe that we are called to do something. Each of us has been given an assignment by God, and some of us are called to business. And that is, for some of us, that's wealth creation. You go to business so you can create wealth. That's the whole purpose of business, making a profit and building wealth. But that, of course, has to have a purpose to it. And that is a purpose to use that money, I think, to advance God's kingdom. Of course, being in the front line, because really business is the front line of ministry, I think. You're surrounded by all these people, customers, suppliers, all these people, your staff that you're mixing with, that you can witness to and share the gospel with. So it's really, really a massive opportunity. So the question I think for you to ponder is, are you called to business? And the problem I think for many business people is this. We have separated the sacred from the secular. So we think of church as something that is sacred, and we think of the business world as very secular. And so we think that to perform as Christians, we need to do more stuff at church. Now, I'm not trying to dissuade you from helping Chi and doing good stuff at church. That's not what I'm trying to do. But merely to say that if you're called to business, how can you use your role, you spend most of your working hours in, to advance God's kingdom? How can you be an ambassador for Christ in the marketplace and treat the marketplace as something that is sacred? Okay, that it's a spiritual place where you can make a massive impact. When we look at the word work, if you go into the website Bible Gateway and you type in the word work, you find that it appears 555 times in the Bible. Okay, we were built to work. In fact, for those of you who came this morning to the retirement one, you'll know that my view is that we should never truly retire. Now, of course, that doesn't mean you stay in paid work for the rest of your life. But we need to embrace this idea that work is a good thing from God. Okay, work is a good thing. In fact, when you read Genesis 1, and what does it say? God worked 6 days, and on the seventh day he rested. Now this is important. We'll talk about rest a bit later on, because there's a big problem for hyperactive entrepreneurs like me. It's very hard to stop. Anyone who's got their own business will know that what happens at night, you lie in bed, or I don't know about you, but I find it very difficult in the morning, because as soon as I wake up, bang, all of a sudden I've got ideas and things I need to be doing. My brain starts rushing as soon as I wake up. So it's hard yakka in that sense. But we need to know how to work and to rest. But here's what the Bible says about this idea that each of us has different giftings. It says, this is Paul speaking, I wish that all of you were as I am. But each of you has his own gift from God. One has this gift and another has that gift. The reality is that some of you have a gift to be in business. And that is a real blessing to have that gift. One of my big passions is that the church, and as in pastors and business people, start doing more together. Because my experience in working with a lot of churches is pastors, not all, but some don't kind of get business people. And business people just don't get pastors. Okay, and so we don't necessarily work well together, despite the fact that business people desperately need the help of their pastors dealing with ethical issues, spiritual issues in business. They desperately need the help and the guidance of a pastor. And equally, the church needs the skills and the financial resources that business people produce, because wealth is created in business. That's where wealth comes from. People getting up in the morning and creating goods and services, etc. So my view here is that many Christian business people haven't fully understood the calling over their lives. You know, this is the kind of stuff I've heard from friends of mine over the years, Christian friends. I've had people say to me, in fact, a friend of mine, we were camping, the four of us went camping, 4 guys. And one said to me, I'll go into ministry when I've built up an asset base sufficient that I can live off the passive income. Then I'll go into ministry. You know what I said to him? I said, you'll never go into ministry. I said, if that's your view, that you have to build up enough assets before you go into ministry, you will never go into ministry. Because it's the wrong heart, the wrong mindset. And you'll never have enough. That's the other thing, you'll never have enough. At some point, if God is calling you into ministry, you have to obey the call. And likewise, some of you are thinking about starting your own business. If you believe that is a calling, you have to obey that call to do that. Okay? The other thing I hear is people say to me, you know, I work really hard so that I can take time off to do Christian work. The problem with that mindset is doing work is Christian work. Being in the marketplace is Christian work. Okay? My employer pays me to work, not to preach the gospel. Well, that may be true, and yes, you've got to act responsibly in the workplace, but the reality is we are there, we want to share the gospel with people we work with. The other one I always hear is, when I retire, I'm going to get more involved in ministry. Once again, that may be true to some degree, but it's often not built on the right mindset. Others say, I'm involved in X, Y, Z at my local church. In other words, what they're doing is they're separating the secular from the secular. They're separating the two. Whereas what we need to understand is work is sacred. It is for the kingdom. Another thing, and a strong Christian would give it all up and go into ministry. And for some of you, maybe that is what God is actually asking you to do. Give up your job and go into ministry. Maybe that's the truth. Like Pastor Chi going from dentistry into the ministry. That's perfectly legitimate. And the other thing is, people say to me, the workplace is not spiritual. Just ask Israel Folau how true that is. It's very spiritual. It's a war zone. In fact, one of the things I think that's problematic in Western culture is we forget that we are in a relentless 24/7 battle for souls. It's a war that will not end until Jesus returns. It will not end until Jesus comes back. And so we need to realise that when we're in the marketplace, we are there and part of the war. And so we need to be on the offensive. We need to be on the front lines. And of course, the other mistake we'll make is that the church is more important than business. Once again, it's confusing the language. If you're in business, that is a kingdom place to be, as much as being in church as well. They're all important. So the other thing here is to say, look, if you're in business, you're in ministry. In fact, I'd say this to any Christian, whether you're a school teacher or whatever you do, the moment you sign up and you become a Christian and say, I'm a follower of Christ, you're now in ministry. And that's how the attitude that we need to take with us. And therefore, our role is significant. Now, I think one of the problems for business people is they've often made this misdistinction between being a Christian in business versus having a kingdom business mindset. And I want to make it a clear distinction between the two. So certainly my attitude in my younger years was that my role as a Christian business person was to fund my local church and to be a good boy at work, i.e. be a person of integrity. I would class those two things as a given. Yes, as a Christian, you should be a person of integrity at work and you should fund your local church. To me, they're a given. But we need to have a much bigger mindset than that, okay? We need to have the mindset that we want to fund the kingdom. What can we fund? What can we do to advance God's kingdom? How can we, rather than just acting with integrity, which is very important, how can we act to build the kingdom of God? Rather than just taking people to church, which is a good thing, in fact, statistically, 1 in 10 Australians, if you invite them to church, will say yes. So we should be inviting people to church. But what about the other 9 in 10 that aren't going to set foot in the door? We've got to go and take the church to them. What did Jesus say? He said, go into the world and make disciples. Okay, so we've got to do both. It can't just be bringing people in. We've got to go out and take the church to them. Okay, we've got to take the faith to them. You know, people who are Christian business people often worry that the world is going to shake us up and change us. Whereas the reality is, if you're a kingdom business, it's how can you use your business to go into the world and change the world. Now think about how big corporates are now behaving. Most of the big corporates now are becoming cultural warriors. Look at Qantas. Okay, Qantas has one of their planes now is painted with the homosexual, rainbow, and it says proud sponsor of the Sydney Mardi Gras. Who would have ever thought that would be there 20 years ago? I wouldn't have thought it. But this is a business that is actively trying to change culture. As Christians, we need to get in there and change culture and bring God's kingdom here. That's what we need to do as Christian business people. Rather than just going with the industry that you're in, transform the industry. If your industry is notorious for bad ethics, these days the media bags almost every industry these days, but think about your industry. How can you be the salt and the light in your industry? What can you do to shine the light in your industry to make it better, to make it improve, to make it more Christ-like? Of course, here, Christian business just goes into business for profit, whereas we need to have this mindset, my business has a purpose beyond just making money. Yes, you need to make a profit, or guess what? You won't be in business for very long. So you need to make a profit, and God willing, you hopefully make a lot of profit. Okay, but we need to have beyond that. We need to think beyond that. We need to have a purpose. We don't want to just grow our business. We want to multiply it. I'm going to talk about multiplication a bit more later. We also, under this Christian business model, we just operate as we're the CEO of our business. Whereas someone who's a kingdom business owner says, you know what? I hand my business over to God, and it is God who's the CEO. And we actually seek God for the decisions we're making about our business. And we get spirit-led. That's where we need to take our businesses. And of course, lastly, rather than just going along with the culture, we want to change the culture. And that to me is a big, big challenge that we have before us. So the reality is all business needs to become Christian kingdom business. That's what we need to have as our mindset. We need to have the view that we are in the front line. Okay? You're surrounded by all these people who probably don't yet know Jesus Christ. So you have a fantastic opportunity to go in there and to reach these people and share the good news with them. Okay, so that's just sort of laying the groundwork. So that was the first part, just to talk about what does it mean to have a kingdom business and have that kingdom business mindset. I now want to talk about some of the challenges and opportunities we now face in our world. And I've touched on some of these in some of the earlier presentations, but I'd like to start with two particular scriptures here. Okay, the first one is this. From Proverbs 22. It says, a sensible man watches for problems ahead and prepares to meet them. The simpleton never looks and suffers the consequences. Then the second one in Ecclesiastes, since no one knows the future, who can tell someone else what is to come? So I stand before you, I do not know the future. However, I do believe that there are certain problems going on in the world at the moment that give us a bit of an insight into what may come. And so we can be prepared for those things. Okay? It's like when I was talking earlier at the marriage one about having insurance. We don't know what may happen to us in our life, but we do know that there are bad things that might happen, which is why we take out life insurance. It's the same sort of thing, right? So it's the same thing with business. We can look for potential problems ahead. And I want to suggest to you that some of the figures that I'm going to show you now, they look a bit negative, so you might think, oh, this guy's a pessimist. That's not the point. I want to suggest to you that there are some fantastic kingdom opportunities coming up going forward as we move forward. So let's have a look here at some of them. These are what I call, I was going to say the 3 Ds, it's actually 4 Ds. My maths is bad. It's a bit of a problem for a financial planner, don't you think? So the 4 Ds are debt, deficits, demographics, and disruption. Okay? So let's have a look at these. Now, I believe that we can identify some long-term trends. The problem we have with our media, unfortunately, in Australia, and this is really a global problem, is the media focuses on the surface. Most of what we hear in the media is pretty superficial, and we don't hear some of the really big issues that are going to affect our society over the next 10, 20 years. And what I want to do is try and focus on what's underneath the surface, right? Now, as I mentioned before, some of this may sound pessimistic to some degree, but I want to suggest to you it's an opportunity to advance God's kingdom. So let's start with the divided states of America. Okay? So, you've heard me talk this morning and some of the presentations about the level of debt in the world. I like to pick on America because it's gone from being the biggest debtor nation to now being the biggest creditor. It owes more money than anybody else. It currently owes somewhere around the $73 trillion mark. Now just picture this, because all of you are probably employed or business owners. Imagine if you got up in the morning and you went off to work and you're carrying $161,000 worth of the government's debt on your way to work. That's what you've got to pay back as a taxpayer in America. That's just the government debt, okay? Then, if you work it out per citizen, so this is their total debt. So total debt here includes government debt, household debt, and business debt. If you add it all up, it gets to around that figure, which works out at about $200,000 per citizen. Okay, huge amount. Interest bill is $2.4 trillion a year. Think about what that does to the US budget. Okay, they've got $2.4 trillion they've got to pay in interest each year. Works out about $7,000 per person. Now, this is the one that really frightened me. If you take that $73 trillion worth of debt and you divide it amongst American families, it works out about $800,000 per family. So the question is, do you think they could ever repay it? I think when you're talking about that sort of figure, having to be paid back by American families becomes very unrealistic compared to the $9,000 that they have in savings per family. Okay, staggering amount of debt. The other thing that you don't hear a lot of talk about, once again, this is one of those things below the surface. We have a similar problem here in Australia. It's what's called unfunded liabilities. Have people heard of that terminology before? Less commonly heard. What it is we know, based on current laws such as Medicare and Social Security, if we project those into the future, we can work out what debts we're going to have in the future based on current laws. So, for example, we have an ageing population, so we know that by 2035 you're going to have all these retirees, and so we have all these liabilities that we haven't yet incurred, but will in the future. When you add those up, it takes America another $45 trillion. So their real coming debt is about $100 trillion. The figures are just absolutely absurd. And this is not an American problem, it's a global problem. Since the global financial crisis, the level of debt around the world has gone up by 30%. Okay, it's actually higher than that, 40%. Now, government debt, this is a scary figure here, has grown at a rate of 9% per annum. Now, do you know any economy around the world that's growing at 9% per annum? So think of it this way, the debt's growing at 9% per annum, but the economies are growing at a much slower pace. So you can see here there's some pretty serious. Now, there's a simple problem with debt. You've got to pay it back. And debt is taking from the future. You're spending money now that you don't have, you're taking from the future. At some point you have to pay it back. Now, when we look at that, in Australia, our interest bill is about $16.6 billion a year, which is what we spend on public schools and hospitals. Does that sound like a very sensible thing to be doing? We've got that much interest we're paying, $16 billion a year. Now, the question you might be wondering is, well, what on earth is America going to do? So I like good old Winston Churchill. In fact, there's a good movie about him. In fact, it's on, I think, Foxtel at the moment. I think it's called The Darkest Hour with Winston Churchill. And Winston Churchill said this about America. He said, "You can always count on Americans to do the right thing after they've tried everything else." Okay? That's probably what to expect. Now, what about little old Australia? Let's focus here on Australia. Now, some of you have already heard me talk about our level of debt now is the second highest in the world. This is household debt. The figure I haven't shown you today is this figure here. What this shows you on the right-hand side is interest on debt that Australian households pay. So the average Aussie household now is paying 9% of their income in interest repayments. If you want to put it another way, the average Aussie Christian is tithing to the bank. Now, given the recent Royal Commission, would we say that tithing to the bank is a good idea? Now, I know statistically from all the churches we consult to that the level of giving to church sits somewhere between 2 to 4%, depending on the church, of gross income. Okay, so our level of giving to banks in interest is far higher than what we give to churches. So I think there's something in that for Christians to ponder in terms of how we manage our finances and manage our debt. But the big question here is, given this figure here, if you look in 1990, and we talked about this earlier, interest rates were about 17%, okay? And it consumed 9% of people's incomes then. Today it's consuming 9% of people's incomes, but interest rates are 3 or 4%. So here's the question. What's going to happen when interest rates go up here? What's going to happen to that figure? How much of people's incomes are going to be consumed by interest repayments? So here's the question for yourself. Think about your own personal situation for a moment. How will this affect your household? How will it affect your capacity to give? How will it affect your capacity to give to church? My concern with a lot of churches, because we help a lot of churches, and I look at how they manage the money and how little they have in reserves as a general rule, is that many churches will find that their giving will drop during this period when these things start to unfold. And so they need to be prepared for that. But my message to Christians is to start adopting a debt-free mentality. I'm not suggesting debt, of course, is sinful, but we do need to have a debt-free mentality because this is a real big issue. What about China? China's obviously a massive topic these days. Very relevant to us as Australians. Why? Because 30% of our exports go to China. So it's deeply relevant for us. Now the problem with China, I think of China, it's a bit like a black box. You don't really know what's going on. Okay? And so one of the problems with China is their level of debt is far, far higher than that of America. Not so much in absolute terms, but in percentage terms. Okay? Because a lot of their debt is not sitting with the federal government, it sits with the state-owned enterprises. Okay? So no one really knows the true state of China. And they reckon there's something like 68 million empty apartments in China because they've got this endless construction boom that they keep building and building and building. But China is heading for certain tough times. So the message from this, as depressing as it may sound, is the governments are broke. That's the reality, because they've all overpromised and they've racked up these debts. So it's getting more change and more chaotic. Who would have thought, how many Prime Ministers have we had in Australia now in the last 10 years? Sorry? Lost count, yeah? So you'd think we were a third world country, by the way, how many Prime Ministers we've had, right? It's just constantly changing. It's getting more and more chaotic. We're getting more polarised, so you're seeing this throughout the world. You know, when you think about someone like, say, Donald Trump, he's be seen more on the heavy right. And now if you're listening to any of the Democrats that are running for president next year, some of these are the most extremist nut cases you've ever heard. One's a young lady who's actually in Congress, she's 28. She thinks that we shouldn't fly planes anymore because of global warming. Okay? So you've got all these extreme things are getting more polarised out there. You know, we've been hearing about Brexit now for the past couple of years. Scotland tried to break off from the UK. Texas, there's 1 million Texans that want to break off from the US. In fact, California too, there's a big movement there to break that up. And these things have happened in the past. And then Catalan in Spain tried to break off. And then, of course, they arrested the politicians that tried to break it up. So things are getting more and more polarised in the world. Now, some of you know, I lived in Argentina for 5 years. My wife is from there originally. She moved over here when she was 20. And we went and lived there in 2012 when I sold my financial planning business. And it was a fascinating insight. And it's actually one of the reasons why I think you really need to pray for this nation of Australia. Because what I saw there was very insightful. What a lot of you probably don't aware of is that 100 years ago, Argentina was the third richest country in the world. Today it's about 70 or 80th. It's a country that's been in long-term decline. It's the 8th biggest country in the world in terms of land mass, and its population is about double Australia. It's extremely resource rich, yet the GDP per person is about a quarter of Australia because it's so badly managed and it's very socialist and it's extremely corrupt. Now, when I was there, inflation was about 30 to 40% per annum. So a cup of coffee cost me 18 pesos when I got there and 60 pesos when I left. Now, can you imagine that sort of chaos in Australia? In fact, I spoke to my mother-in-law. Argentina collapsed in 2001. And when that happened, prices in the supermarket, they didn't put electronic pricing, proper tags. They just hand wrote it because the price would change from morning to night. Can you imagine operating a business in that environment? Where the inflation, I think, got about to 1,000%, which is what it is in Venezuela and places like that at the moment. With Argentina, you can get money into the country, but getting it out is basically, it's hard to get it out legally, put it that way. The black market in the US dollar, because the currency is deflating about 30% per annum, what people want to do is they want to own US dollars. Of course, what does the government do? It bans you from buying US dollars. So there's a whole black market in the US dollar of about 40 million US dollars per day. Okay? In fact, it's the weird country. It's the only black market I know that's like an official black market. It opens up at 11 o'clock each day, and they publish the black market in the newspaper. In fact, there's a website, if you go to, it's called dollarblue.net, because they call it the blue dollar, and that is the black market. So no one gets arrested for using the black market, but anyway. Now here's a country that has the same resources as Australia. Same resources, yet we have 34% of people living in poverty. My GPS when I was living in Argentina, because everything's in Spanish, said on your GPS it had built in Zona Peligrosa, which means danger zone. Okay? It was built into the GPS and it was bright pink, so you didn't go into these dangerous areas. Because if you go into a place that's poor, it's a real spiritual realm, and they're dangerous. Okay? And of course, guns and things like that. And it's had a shrinking middle class for a long time. So the thing about Australia, and I think what concerns me about Australia, is its complacency. If you look at that, how many of you believe that would be ever Australia? Honestly. Most of us believe that would never happen here. Yeah, that's a country with the exact same resources as this one. And it's been like that through mismanagement, corruption, and so forth. And so that's why it's so important that we are on our knees praying for godly policies in our parliament. Okay? It's so, so critical. I used to be sceptical when I was younger of praying for world peace and all these sort of things, until you realise just how significant these issues really are. But don't feel too sorry for the Argentines, because they do have the world's best meat. That's a meal from my wife and I. It could feed probably about 6 people, but it's actually intended for 2. It's cheap and really good quality, for those of you who like meat. Has any of you actually been to Argentina? Anyone here? You're missing out. Great place as a tourist. Maybe less so as a citizen. Now, so that's a bit of history, but now let's look at the age of disruption. With all this automation, all this thing going on in the world is changing rapidly. This here is Otto. Now, Otto is a truck in Nevada driving at about 80 kilometres an hour. Of course, there's one big catch. There's no driver. This already exists. This is on the road in Nevada in the US. Here's the thing, how many truck drivers will we have in 10 years? In fact, I've got on our monthly newsletter, I sent out a video a few months ago. It was a video, this is a trial going on in Canberra at the moment. I think it's done by Google and a few others. These drones, you go onto an app, you order a coffee. This drone goes from the coffee shop to your house, takes about 3 minutes, and delivers a hot coffee to your house. This is going on already here in Australia. So it is changing very, very rapidly. For those of you who have contemplated becoming Uber drivers, you might want to think twice about that one, because Uber is going completely driverless. Okay? So, interestingly, this is a Samsung. In Argentina, you have one of the highest road tolls in the world. Why? Because Argentines are lovely people, but they're so impatient on the road, okay? In fact, this is what an Argentine road is typically like. In the city, you have some of the biggest roads in the world. In fact, the central road it's called 9th of July in Buenos Aires, in the city, is 24 lanes. I think it's the largest road in the world in terms of, centre street. You look at George Street in Sydney, 4 lanes, tiny. This thing's 24 lanes. But as soon as you get out of the city, it's 2 lanes. Now, I would say Argentines are not very patient, so they have lots of head-on collisions. So what Samsung did, they put a camera on the front of a truck and a TV on the back, so that way you could see oncoming traffic. Okay, so this is the sort of stuff that's been developed. You might have heard software called McJournalism, effectively. Okay, this is software that writes articles. Let's say a company like BHP comes out with an announcement saying, you know, profits up, etc. What this software does, it'll take the announcement, convert it into an article, and then post it straight on the internet. So do we even need journalists in the future? This software wrote something like 1 billion articles in 2015. Okay? The world is changing at this amazing pace. And I think there's lots and lots of opportunities in that. But the thing here is you need to realise, in fact, even in my business, the financial planning business, they have what we call robo-advice now, where you don't actually have to talk to an advisor. You just key in all your details into a piece of software and it'll spit out what you should do. Now, I have some scepticisms about that to some degree, but nonetheless, that's where it's all going. Okay? Robo-advice. So therefore, don't assume that your job or even the business that you have today will look the same in the next 10 years. You need to adapt. Now, it's easy to be fearful about these things, but I see this as a fantastic opportunity. And I certainly pray that God will create give amazing ideas to Christian business people. Now, wouldn't it be great if something like Facebook was actually owned by a Christian? You know, that's the sort of thing we need. We need all these innovative ideas coming through kingdom business people. Then the last one is demographics. Okay, it's no surprise that we have an ageing population. I think I was talking this to the retirees this morning. One of the challenges that we have is the number of people who are going to be dependent on social security in the future and the effect that that's going to then have on our society. In America, 20% of their budget is social security. Anyone know what it is in Australia? About 30% of our budget's now social security. Okay? It's a massive part of our expenditure. And here's the problem. Currently, 21% of the population's over age 65. By 2035, they reckon it's going to be 35% of the population over 65. Now, that'll birth all sorts of new industries. But think of it from this point of view. In 1960, there were 5 workers for every social security recipient. That's now down to 2.8. And by 2035, that's going to reach 1.9. So imagine this, there's 2 workers for every social security recipient. Okay, so how sustainable is that? Taxes are going to have to rise, maybe benefits will fall. And one of the problems and challenges we have now is when you think about elections, so we had our election back in May, 1 in 2 Australians now get some form of government handout. How do you think that influences the way they vote? Okay? It has a huge influence on how they make the decision. Basically, who's going to give me the most cookies? Or, you know, the Labor Party proposed a whole heap of new taxes. There's about 6 or 7 different new taxes. And of course, that's taking away from people. And so, of course, they ended up losing the election. But here's a statement. This is an unknown author, but this is from about 100 years ago, this quote. And it's very important to think through the potential issues here. It says that a democracy cannot exist as a permanent form of government. It can only exist until the voters discover that they can vote themselves largesse from the public treasury. In other words, when the voters realise that whoever they vote for will give them the most things, eventually that country goes broke. And that's why I say Australia's situation and America, and if you look at Europe, which is even worse, we really need to pray for these nations because governments have overpromised what they can really ultimately deliver on. And so there's some big issues coming up. So there are opportunities amidst all this chaos though. Okay? So it's easy to look at some of these things and go they're negative, but there's also massive opportunities. So in saying that, the question is, well, if that's the case, how on earth do we do business today? Okay? How do we do business today given that sort of thing? So first thing I want to talk to you about is doing business supernaturally. And the best way to explain this is by just telling you a story about something that happened to myself. About 4 or 5 years ago, we're living in Argentina, and my wife and I went to this conference in the US. It's called NRB, stands for National Religious Broadcasters. It's probably the largest Christian media conference in the world. And the reason we went there is we wanted to work out how we could promote Wealth with Purpose on US radio, because we do that quite a lot here through Christian radio in Australia. We wanted to work out how could we get our name out and brand out in the US. Anyway, we got to this conference and it was overwhelming. The hotel had 2,500 rooms and 17 restaurants. It was this massive hotel. There were 4,000 attendants. And my wife and I were going, how on earth are we going to know who to meet here? There's 4,000 people. Who are we going to meet? So we thought, what do you do? So in our hotel room every morning, we get up and we just pray. And we say, God, this is why doing business supernaturally is straightforward. It goes basically along the lines of, God, help me. But all we did was we prayed in the morning. We woke up and we said, God, open the doors to the right people and close the doors to the wrong ones. That's all we prayed. And anyway, not long later that day, I was in the men's toilet of all places, and I'm standing there washing my hands, and I look over to my right, and there's a guy there called Dr. Michael Brown. Now, any of you, if you follow US politics or follow, this guy is a prolific author over there. He's a radio host, and he writes lots of articles, mainly about all the controversial things going on in the world, like same-sex marriage and transgender and all this kind of stuff that's going on over in the US. So he writes all about that. And I'm in Argentina, and I happen to follow this guy because I find him very interesting, and I personally have a lot of admiration for people who deal with all these tough issues that we don't often talk about. Anyway, so I got talking to him and said, I follow you from Argentina and read a lot of your stuff. And he said to me, what do you do? And I said, I've got a stewardship ministry, and we try and teach people about money and so forth. And I said, we're in the US trying to work out how we can promote it on US radio. And he goes to me, well, how would you like to go on in half an hour? And I must admit, I panicked. I said, okay. So half an hour later, he'd had one of the hotel rooms booked out, and they had all their equipment. And so he was doing this live radio show across the US. So we did this 5-minute interview, and he said, that was good. Can you come back in an hour? Because we changed time zones because America has, 5 or 6 different time zones as you move across the country. And so we did another one 5 minutes later. So here I was in America thinking that I would meet a few people and eventually I'd be on US radio maybe 6 months later. I was on half an hour later after meeting this guy. And that taught me a lot of things about God, okay? Firstly, it's not me, and it's not my strength, it's not my wisdom or any of these things, but God can open doors like that. Okay? Just amazing things can happen. And that really taught me, it was very humbling to have that lesson and just to see what God could do and to meet people and to just have that sort of exposure, because God can open the doors. God can make it rain. He can do whatever he likes. So we need to learn to do business supernaturally. And so I really encourage you that in your businesses to seek God with everything. Involve God on a daily basis in your business. Get up in the morning, go into your room, turn on some worship music, start your day with worship. Okay? Start your day with worship and pray and ask God for help. Ask him to help you with your business. Ask him for wisdom. Ask him to open the right doors. Do that on a daily basis. Second thing, consecrate your business to God. One of the things you've heard me talk about through some of the other seminars is the idea that everything we have is God's. We are not the owner. So what I'd like to encourage you to do is to consecrate your business to God. Or put it another way, to dedicate your business to God. Hand your business back to him and say, God, this is your business, not mine. What are you going to do with it? And help me, God, to be a good steward of the business that you've given me. The other thing, and I've talked about this ad nauseum, so I won't say any more, other than to say, get your business out of debt. Now, some businesses need debt, but one of the things, part of what our ministry did at first is I did a lot of kingdom business coaching. We don't do it anymore, but we did do it for quite some time. And what I found, particularly with a lot of clients, is they had overdraft accounts for their business, and they found themselves in this never-ending cycle of being able to pay it off. And so months had come in, money had come in, the overdraft would go down, a few bad months, overdraft would go up, and they're in this perpetual state of debt. And they found it really, really hard to get out of. So have a different view. Build up cash reserves in your business and run it lean and keep it in a safe place. I mentioned before this idea that you need to rest. Okay, now to me in Scripture there are really two types of rest. There's the Sabbath rest, where you have a day off each week, and then there's what I call resting in God. So if we look at the Sabbath rest for a moment in Genesis 2, what does it say? It says, by the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. Okay? So my view is simply this. If it's good enough for God, it's certainly good enough for us. Okay? You need to rest. Now, I must say I'm a bit hypocritical on this one, because the nature of what I do means I'm away on a lot of weekends, like I'm working right as we speak, and therefore I find it very easy to work hard and work a lot. But at some point you need to switch off. You need to rest. You need to give yourself physical rest. You need to spend time with your family. Spend your time meditating on God's word. You've got to switch off. Because with a business, the problem with having your own business is it's kind of like something that's never finished. You'll never be fully happy with your business. There'll always be something to improve. There'll be a new product, a new customer to call. There'll always be something. So you've got to stop, switch off and have a rest. Switch off ideally from social media and all these things. Don't check your emails. Okay, have Saturday off. Do not check your emails. Actually have a proper break and give yourself a rest. The second rest though, that I think is also important, is resting in God. So in Matthew we read, when Jesus says, come to me all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. So to me, this is about handing everything over to God. Stop doing things in your own strength, because the reality is God is above our circumstances. We don't need to be always doing things in our own strength. Yes, there's an obligation on us Christians to do things excellently. We need to do things well, and we need to work hard. That's a biblical mandate. But we need to rest in God and hand things over to him and let him do the work. Because when you do that, you're really allowing yourself open up to divine appointments. When you rest in God, you're allowing God's direction for your business rather than you always stressed out worrying about what you're going to do. Less stress. You're walking by faith because you're letting God guide your business and you're letting God deal with the problem. Sometimes our problems seem too big, but that's why we've got to hand it over to God and do it in his strength. Then lastly, I want to suggest, how do you make your business a truly kingdom business? How do you make it a truly kingdom business? Many of you would have heard of William Tyndale. Okay? William Tyndale is famous because he was the person that converted the Bible into English. Okay? Back in, well, it must be 300 or 400 years ago. Okay? He was the first person to translate it in English from the original manuscripts. So in England at the time, hard to believe, but in England, translating the Bible was punishable by death. And the Bible was in Latin. So they'd go to services and they'd have preachers reading the Bible in Latin. Okay? And it was controlled by Rome, effectively. William Tyndale thought, this is crazy. The common man has no access to the Bible. So he said, I'm going to translate the Bible into English. So one Sunday he was preaching in church, and there was a guy sitting in the audience. His actual name is Humphrey Monmouth. And Humphrey Monmouth heard him preach and was extremely impressed by him. And so after the service, he went up to William and started chatting to him and said, I'd love to go to dinner with you. And William Tyndale shared his vision for translating the Bible into English. And Humphrey Monmouth said, that's a brilliant idea. I'm going to fund it. So he provided a roof over his head for William Tyndale. He also sent him to Germany where they had to translate the original manuscripts. Humphrey Monmouth was a wealthy English trader. And when they translated the manuscripts, they had to smuggle them back into England on ships that Humphrey Monmouth owned. In the end, William Tyndale was hung. He was caught and he was hung at age 42. Humphrey Monmouth, I believe, was also caught and he ended up being put in jail. As a result of these two men, their little project, not long after, we had the release of the King James Bible. And as a result of these two men, all of us and 600 million other people around the world have access to the Bible in English. Now, the point of that story is You as a business person, okay, so think you're not necessarily the pastor, you're the business person. What can you do in your business? What is it that God is giving you to do? What's he giving you to fund? What's the project that he's giving you that you can sow into that may just change the world? These guys would have had no idea what they were really doing. I mean, they had their vision, but they had no idea what it was going to do long term. They wouldn't know that 600 million people around the world now have a Bible because of them. They never would have known it. That's the outcome. Many of you would have heard of Daniel Flynn. He's got the thank you bottles that you see in Coles and Woolies stores. Okay, and that's a result. Sorry? And sanitizers, yeah. And, you know, this body, when people buy these products, it now goes to funding projects around the world. And on the bottle, it has a number, and you can go online and actually look at the project that you're funding by buying that water bottle. That's social enterprise. It's fantastic. Here in Melbourne, a friend of mine, this is a guy I actually stayed with on Thursday night when I arrived down in Melbourne. It's a friend of mine. This guy's a big guy. He spent most of his adult life laying pipes. So big, strong bloke. Anyway, God gave him a vision to work in the construction industry and solve one of the big problems. And one of the big problems in the construction industry is safety. And part of the reason why there's so many safety problems is if you think about a big company like Lendlease. So Lendlease, in their head office, have all these double degree engineers, right? Highly, highly intelligent people. Then out on the construction site, you have guys that often struggle with basic literacy. And the guys in the head office are the ones writing all these manuals that the guys on the field are meant to read. And guess what? These guys hate each other. They don't understand each other. So what these guys develop, these guys go to Stairway Church, these guys have developed this product, they developed an app. And what it does is they put QR codes on all the machinery, like big equipment, and the tradesmen go up to it, they zap it, and it shows them a video on how to use the equipment properly, rather than reading all these expensive PhD manuals. As a result, the safety has improved dramatically, a lot less, so to the point where the Victorian government is talking about making it law that you have to have these things on building sites. Lendlease is rolling this out globally, and all these construction companies are now coming to their door. And now they're trying to apply it to lots of other industries. But these guys are really amazing kingdom people. Not only do they want to try and create this app, just so to improve safety, and also, but if you listen to this guy talk, he wants to build a culture of honour within the construction industry. Because here you have these people who are very highly qualified, and these people that struggle to read and write, and they don't like each other. So they want to bring a culture of honour where they honour each other. But the other thing they want to do with this app is they've added lots of new tools to it, and what they're trying to do is actually witness to the construction people by putting Christian content on this app. One of those things happens to be wealth of purpose, so that these construction people can watch videos of me talking on budgeting and things like that. But what they want to do is bring in all these issues. Mental health's a massive issue. Finance is a massive issue, because with construction industry, often the income is very variable. You might be on a project, then the project stops. You might not get another job for 3 months. And then, of course, and so these guys, their income goes like that, and they have lots of financial problems. So that's what they're doing. A friend of mine, Tim, Tim is one of Australia's most successful investment bankers. I don't quite know what he earns, but it's somewhere in the vicinity of $10 million per annum. He's probably Australia's most successful private equity guy. So what they do is they buy businesses for around 100 or 200 million, then they grow them and then refloat them back onto the stock market. It's called private equity. Okay? That's what these guys do. Now, this guy is one of the most amazing kingdom people I've ever met. Every time I'm in his office, there's some other Christian charity there before or after me that he's giving money to. Now, what he's done is a whole range of things. He's an Anglican guy, and he funds a lot of the Anglican church, a lot of their activities. But he started this Christian film school in Sydney. So he bought the building, hired someone, and the idea is to train the next generation of Christian actors, singers and artists. Okay? That's what he's created. Across the road from that, he set up a cafe, and he put this Christian lady in charge, and all the people they hire are ex-prostitutes. They're trying to help women out of the sex trade and give them jobs and give them dignity. And behind that, they planted a church just because they didn't have anything else better to do. Okay, so this is what this guy's doing. And this is barely touching the iceberg of what he does with his money. Okay? But I say this to inspire you because think big. What can God do through you? Okay? Think big about these things, what you can actually do. This one, I don't actually know this guy personally, but I know of a Christian plumber in Australia who sponsors 1,000 compassion kids. How good is that? Imagine getting up in the morning knowing you've got 1,000 kids you've got to feed. A bit of pressure there. But how awesome is that? Okay? There's amazing things that you can do when you follow God's call into business and you do what God's asking you to do. And think big about your business. Don't just think about making a profit. You've got to do that anyway. Think big about what you can do. So the other thing to encourage you here with, and the only way you're going to do with this, is to build an intimate relationship with God. One of the things that's so remarkable about the Christian faith is that you can have a personal relationship with the creator of the universe. No other faith has that, only us. Okay? It's amazing. He wants you to be 100% dependent on him. He's reliable, we're less so. He's unlimited ideas and wisdom for your business, unlimited ability to protect you. You know, sometimes you're going to face ethical issues and you're going to have to make tough decisions, but he can protect you. He can provide for you. There's no recessions in heaven. He can give you the ability to gain wealth. Now, I take the view that Christian business people should be very humble. Because in Deuteronomy it says, remember the Lord, for it is he who gives you the ability to produce wealth. It ain't you, it's God. Okay, so we've got to remember that it's the ability to gain wealth and produce wealth is from God. So we need to honour him with our finances and with our businesses, and remember it all comes from him. And God never gives up on you. Okay? So just some practical things to think about. One is focus on the long-term trends. There's lots of things going on in the world. What are some of the trends that you can take your business into? I mentioned before, get out of debt. I won't say any more there. One of the things about being a business owner is it's lonely. Okay? It's lonely when you're running your own business and you're expected to be a jack of all trades. So what I really encourage you is to set up a board of advice. So I've got this for our ministry, for Wealth with Purpose. If you go on our site, you can see our leadership team. And these are people where you meet with them, ideally quarterly, get people on your board. You don't pay them, but you might buy them lunch or breakfast or something or other. Give them a bottle of wine, whatever you want to do. And these people are going to sow into your business. They're going to share their wisdom, their business ideas. Maybe you get someone who's a great marketer, someone who's a great accountant, someone who's a great lawyer. Have them on your board, meet once every 3 months, and have them sow into your business. People that love you, who care for you, who want to see you succeed. They want to see your business bear fruit. Okay? Start a board of advice. It'll get you going. Get help. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Okay? Diversify. One of my favourite passages in Ecclesiastes 11, chapter 2. It says, invest in 7 ventures, yes, in 8, because you do not know what disaster may come upon the land. Now, what does any financial planner tell you when we talk about investing your money? Diversify. So you need to do the same in your business. Now, with your business, only disclaimer I'd say here, don't diversify your business so much that you lose focus. So this is one of my problems, is as a business owner, I'm always coming up with this hyperactive personality. I'm always coming up with new ideas on how new revenue streams, and we can add financial coaching, we can add this, we can add that, and endless ideas. You've got to be focused, right? But consider how you can diversify your revenue streams and grow them. Have cash reserves. And then lastly, multiply. And that's what I want to finish on, just this concept of multiplication. So, just want to touch on it briefly. Multiplication. First scripture from 2 Corinthians, it says this. Now may he who supplies the seed to the sower and bread for food supply and multiply the seed that you have sown and increase the fruits of your righteousness, while you are enriched in everything for all liberality, which causes thanksgiving through us to God. Now, who supplies the seed? God. What's our job? To sow. And then we pray, God, multiply what you've given me. Multiply. Now, let's apply this practically. How can you multiply your business? Franchising, licensing, cross-selling, social media. There's so many different ways you can multiply your business. With Wealth with Purpose, what we do, around Australia, we have a couple of coaches in different states that can go into churches and do essentially what I do. Our long-term model is to take that around the world, so we can have coaches all around the world that can go and do what I'm doing now, just so we can multiply it, because at the end of the day, I can't be everywhere. But if I want to have the maximum impact, I've got to multiply it. I can't just grow it by addition, I've got to multiply it. Otherwise, I'm not going to have the same impact that I want to have over the long run. So we need to multiply what God's given us. Now, how does this work in practice? Let's apply it to winning the lost. Okay, you win 5 people for Jesus. Great. But what you want to do is train those same 5 people to go and win 5 people more each to Jesus. Okay? All of a sudden, you've now got 30 people. Because those 5 people going to witness to 5 more. And then it just keeps multiplying and multiplying. It keeps multiplying. And eventually, you've only won personally 5 people to Christ, but you've trained them to go and do the same thing. After 10 time periods, you've reached 12 million people. And so the question is, how do we multiply our impact? How do we win the lost through multiplication? Same applies to business. Okay? You tell your friends about it. What do? Our financial planning works on the basis of word of mouth predominantly. People say, Alex, he's a reasonable planner, he's a nice guy. I hope they say that. And they go and tell people about you, and then you get more clients and so on. Okay? It's a multiplication effect. Same thing with your business. Now, you might think these figures are completely unrealistic, but Facebook started 15 years ago, and it's now got, 1.5 billion users. It works exactly on this concept of multiplication. It's probably the world's best example of multiplication. And in business, think of McDonald's, Subway, Harvey Norman, all of these operating on multiplier models. Okay, so let's say your business is a bakery. You might think, I've got a humble bakery. Well, that's great. Why can't you be the next Baker's Delight, which is a franchise all across Australia? Okay, so think big about your business. Same you could apply to poverty. Same sort of concept. We can reach lots and lots of people. One of my favourite organisations, many people have heard of this charity, Opportunity International. Okay, what they are, they provide microfinance loans around the world, mainly in countries like the Philippines. Now what it is, they get about $10,000 together. So you, as the donor, probably put in, say, $50 a month. They set up what they call a trust bank with $10,000 in it. They lend that money out to poor people in countries like the Philippines. I think 80% of the loans go to women. And they then do something with the money. They usually go and buy maybe a sewing machine and start a clothing business, or they start a little tuck shop, or any of these sort of things. What happens is they then repay the loan, and that money then gets re-lent out. So even though you're giving in that monthly figure, it's been lent out, repaid, lent out. So it's this multiplication effect of lending. Now this organisation has lent millions of people around the world, and it's lifted out millions of people out of poverty. It makes up now a significant portion of the employment now in countries like the Philippines. So it's a fantastic way of lifting people out of poverty, and it's by using a multiplier model. So there's all these cool things that we can be doing. So here's the question for you. How are we going to multiply? How are we going to multiply our churches? Let's say you've got a youth group here of 100 kids. Well, so what? 100 kids isn't going to cut it. We need to double that to 200 kids, and then from 200 to 400 kids. How are we going to keep multiplying? That's the question that you wanted to answer. Your ministries, how are we going to... Christianity, of the 2,350 verses in the Bible about money, 900 of them are about helping the poor. So that mandate, it's not the government's job to help the poor. That's our job. So how are we going to do that? Our giving, how are you going to multiply your businesses? How are you going to multiply all the areas of your life? So I'll finish off with this parable from Mark chapter 4. It says, listen, a farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among the thorns, which grew up and choked the plants, so they did not bear grain. Still other seed fell on good soil, and it came up, grew and produced a crop, some multiplying 30, some 60, some 100 times. My prayer for you, for each of you here, is that your life, your business will produce a harvest of 100-fold for the kingdom of God. That's my prayer for you. In fact, many of you would have heard of Chris Tomlin, the Christian artist. He's got a song, I was trying to think of, it's called Whom Shall I Fear, is the name of the song. And one of the lines in that song is this: the God of angel armies is always by my side. So that's what I want to leave with you. The God of angel armies is always by your side. Amen.